Hey there, sinners. It's Adam Knox, and welcome to another episode of The Cult of You. So one of the interesting debates that we find quite often in the occult world is the confusion around sigils and the utilization of mantras and a number of these interesting dimensions of occult philosophy. Some people believe you should use sigils, some believe there's a very specific one that you should use. Others, however, have completely different views. And the fact of the matter is, if we look at the ancient grimoires, it does tend to contradict a lot of the things that we see in the modern manifestations. Most of those sigils weren't as geometrically perfect. So what exactly is the right one to use? Why does it matter? And actually, what is the purpose behind the use of sigil magic? Is it a case where you need to use sigils, or do you have to use the name of the deity? Is the end more effective? In today's episode, I break that down so we can explore this with more details, with some examples. So without any further ado, sit back, relax, and remember to live deliciously. For us to truly understand the utilization and the purpose of sigils and where a lot of this comes from, I'd like to take a little bit of a venture into artificial intelligence. You see, in our research in projects like the Blue Brain and a number of these ventures for understanding and building artificial intelligence solutions and essentially mapping the human neocortex, you see, it's because by studying the human neocortex and mimicking it that we're able to really build artificial intelligence, or at least write machine learning algorithms in such a way and in such a network that it allows it to simulate the behavior as a human being. The qualities that we identify as a human being very much situates based on this portion of the brain in and of itself. The dimensions of the soul we ourselves struggle to articulate, at least in a measure that we as human beings agree to. Now, one of the things that we start to understand as we write these patterns or build these neural networks, so to speak, is that they are exactly mimicking this portion of the brain. And the way that experience comes up is that it progressively builds on top of each other. You see, from the very basis of language, the very basis of experience and context, I can't tell a machine directly from the start that it is supposed to know what you're saying. It can't just know what language is, same way you didn't know when you first started understanding what language was. You first heard a certain sound, or you saw a certain image or an experience, and with repetition of that sound and signal, you started to associate a certain meaning or a certain value or weight, as we would call it, machine learning, to this concept, to this trigger, to the stimulus. Now, that may be as something as basic as seeing a line versus seeing a dotted line versus seeing a curved line. Now, systemically, through the development of these various layers of your neocortex, these essential components of construction, each would build on top of itself. The line would mean this, the color of the line would mean that, the position of the line in three-dimensional space would mean something else. The speed at which it was tracing would have another idea, and this is because at each of those levels of iteration, more meaning would be attached to the experience. You see, even though the line itself simply had one variable meaning, each color that was added had another meaning. So when the mind perceives that same line in attribution to the color, it is essentially firing off two neurological processes. These then build up together to form a meaning, a signal that allows us to determine a course of action. Now, as we can do that now with machines, we understand this is our understanding of the human neocortex, and this is a very essential idea for us to understand the utilization of sigils. There is many of us and many in the industry and in the history that would say that the sigil is the unique signature of the entity. Now, that could be true, yes, but think of it this way. Every single religion on the planet has a concept of God, correct? Now the catch is with this concept of God is that if I went and studied the Hebrew system, my divine name for God may be something like Ayin, right? The no thing. It'll vary based upon the context and the position, yet if I then moved over to a yogic tradition in the East, I may, instead of using the Ayin as a mantra, I may choose to use Eheye, or I may choose to use Ayin. All these are valid names for God in a Kabbalistic Hermetic context. Yet if I'm in the East, I will most likely use Om. If I'm using the Om, which is very commonly known in the meditations as that essential sound of nature, that would represent and access that state of the divine. These are absolutely, completely different things in an auditory fashion. If you and I studied the acoustics of music, we'd realize that at that level their manifestation and vibration are completely different experiences. We do find that even in magic, when I do the LBRP in the Egyptian context versus the Hebrew context, the emotional quality of the experience is different because the acoustics are different, but also because of the cultural neural associations that have been stacked up on top of these things. It's inside of this stacking where we find the most essential bit of information. It is less so the symbol and more so what the symbol represents. You see, because even though the experience and the ritual is different, the insights gleaned historically are the same. If we study the different cultures, the different groups, yes, certainly some of them have different distinctions, but the fundamental premises, the fundamental ideas, the fundamental channelings tend to be exactly the same. And it doesn't matter whether you chose a specific sigil or a specific sound. So why do these happen to be more effective to one individual versus another individual? Why do you perhaps find that sigils work for you, or mantras or the ends work more effectively for you? Which is it? Is it the fact that, the sound is more empowering than the picture? Neither is true. The idea to understand that part is in what neurolinguistic programming refers to as submodalities. Submodalities can be easily understood as our inner interpretation of the senses. And if you're coming from a Kabbalistic point of view, that is a mastery of the understanding of Tiferet. Tiferet represents beauty, and as such, Tiferet is also perceived as, or translated as, the key of imagination. It is one of the ideas that we concept. As such, our experience of beauty is less an external thing and instead an internal representation. It's not how your partner actually looks or how your company, your dream actually looks. It's your internal representation, your inner imagination, or your imago. The old idealized image that we hold within the psyche, that is the essential idea here. Now, when we study imagination and we study the inner language of the human mind, we start to understand the different people and at different phases. This is not a permanent thing. You may find yourself at one point in your life being extremely visual. You're thinking in pictures. And in fact, somebody that speaks at a very high pace is somebody that is thinking in pictures, where somebody that is at a more casual, rhythmic tempo in their conversation is somebody that is more at an audio level. So if you're finding yourself in a more audio space, your brain preference at the time is more oriented to audio-based submodalities, whereas somebody that can even slow down a little bit more, and that can be sexy in the right situation. It can also be very frustrating if you are in a highly visual state. That person is more kinesthetic. In fact, for somebody like that, neither a sigil being pictured or an audio will be that effective. Something that's more body-based, like sex magic as a practice, or somatic descent, or Tai Chi and movement things, these are more effective. That's why somebody doing something like that may take more advantage of using a practice like runic yoga. Using the runes as body postures will be more effective for them. Somebody that's more audio, chanting the rune would be more effective for them. Somebody that's more visual, picturing the rune opening up will be more effective for them. This brings us to understand why then some people find, and we have a couple of classic books out there in the market today that says, you shouldn't be using the sigil. You don't need the sigil. You don't need the mantra. You need this visualization. And they have a visualization that makes you meet a deity and then go through another one. This accomplishes the same thing. It does so for somebody that is more effectively attributed at that time to submodality of visual sense. The catch is, you're never one of these all the time. You have preferences for them. The other part of this is, if you're only utilizing one of your internal senses, you're still halfway locked in the world. You're not all the way completely engaged. Your submodality of choice is quite literally, from a magical point of view, your drug of choice. And it's just that, it's your gateway drug. So if submodality of visual is your strongest, you should use that to start with, but you shouldn't stay there. You should use that to then build up the others. We understand this by studying influence and persuasion. And remember, what magic is at its heart is the influence and persuasion of our own critical factor, the ability to suspend our own disbelief to create alternative experiences and realities within our psyche so that we can fire off those regions in the brain and as such change our vibrational frequency. That's what needs to be remembered. It's the changing of the vibrational frequency that matters, not the method. So it doesn't matter whether you're using a specific sigil or a specific mantra. What does matter is the set of associations built up around it that produces a certain emotional meaning within your nervous system that as such changes your feeling state and as such changes your vibratory frequency. This is the concept of vibe. We all have vibe. You can pick up somebody's vibe just by meeting them. Walking into a room, a portion of your brain calculates what someone's thinking and feeling before they've even said a word. In fact, in the study of facts, facial action signaling, a famous TV show, Lie to Me, was based upon this. We understand that the face speaks a language of over 300 different characters. That means your face has a vocabulary, and we can map this as a science to determine somebody's behavior, choices they're probably going to make. So in the study of facial action signaling, we understand that the face speaks a language of its own. It literally has its own vocabulary and its own letters, almost more complex than the traditional Chinese or other languages that are out there. One of the interesting bits of research, though, for this, now, we've seen TV shows like Lie to Me where they use this language of study to profile people in their success. In fact, FBI profilers will use a system like this and many others to really understand the subtle cues of what someone's really intending. This reveals our unconscious language, our hidden secret communication between each other. Now, an interesting study with this was done by people like Dr. Paul, where they refer to it as beaming. They'd look between different individuals trying to mimic this. We've heard of this, mastering of body language when you're projecting something like that. And one of the things that we found is if you're picturing maybe a vacation in your head and you're picturing how nice that is and you're looking at somebody, you will adjust your facts, your facial signaling in such a way that it'll actually emit a good vibe to the other person. But they found that if you were faking it, if you had a low self-esteem, you felt bad about yourself, you were in a negative space, and you tried to mimic those forms, it didn't matter what you were trying to suggest, the other person would firstly get a negative vibe from you. And not only a negative vibe, you'd almost get the counter. You wouldn't be as successful in projecting the communication. One of the most essential elements for this was a healthy self-esteem. If you had a good self-esteem, if you were feeling good about yourself, when you did this, you would be successful in your communication. This is an important thing to note. Notice how every time we enter ritual, we shift from the perception of our limited self into seeing ourselves as infinite, as divine. We're doing a very specific action to shift our state of self-awareness, to experience self as sacred, as divine, as beautiful, to experience a sense of self-love or self-compassion, to disconnect from the parts we don't like and connect with the parts we do like. This naturally increases our vibrational energy, so to speak. It increases our battery power. So the power behind your ritual is very deeply embedded behind your self-esteem. Your perception of yourself and your capacity really is one of the determining factors of whether you're going to be successful or not. The next part is your associations, as we already spoke about. If you build up sigils, it's more effective for people if they were culturally raised. We always have this gatekeeping that seems to happen between people where they say only if you were initiated in this tradition would these sigils or these symbols work for you. That's true, and it's not true. It's true simply because those people lived their life being conditioned that these set of squiggles or lines or colors or patterns or astrological positions or sounds would have these specific representations. This is also why we say that, the name of God, the Tetragrammaton, is all powerful in the hands of an adept magician and useless in the hands of a neophyte. Why is that? The neophyte has built up no neural association, no emotional anchors to any of the letters. So when they fire off that name, nothing happens to them. Whereas an adept who has spent months, years even, meditating on the deeper symbolism of every single letter in their nervous system, in their neocortex, in their brain, they've wired so many references to this idea that now when they fire off that letter, their brain is actually firing off completely different, unique states, creating an alteration in their state of consciousness, allowing them to disassociate from people, places, time, things, and events, as such bypassing the critical factor, accessing the unconscious. And now simple law is that if we're in the unconscious, if we're in the collective mind, if we're in the quantum field, that it is like a radio, and intent is the receiver. As long as you don't have disbelief and things like that that's keeping you stuck there, that's all that's needed. That which exists in the spiritual exists in superposition. It is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. We all have access to the infinite fields of consciousness that exist there. There's so many ideas, even like panpsychism, that talks about us being a consciousness within a consciousness, that the earth itself has consciousness, that planets have consciousness, that human beings and animals, all these have consciousness. We all have consciousness, but we all speak the language of vibe. The language of vibe is the result of your emotional circuitry, the set of meanings that you have. If you approach your partner, your lover, your friend, your business, and you have a presupposition, an assumption that they are a certain way, that they perceive your actions in a certain way, whether they are going to do that or not is less important than the fact that you are creating that. You're creating that because that's the unconscious signal you're sending out. And a great illustration for this is dogs. Animals are, man's best friend, but they can also be man's worst enemy if man is man's own worst enemy. You see, if you approach an animal with a sense of intense fear, a wild animal, they're going to attack you because they respond to the fear, they respond to the vibe. If you have, however, overcome that fear within yourself, and you have instead emitted a sense of we're all one thing and I am love and this being is mine and we're one, the energy that's being picked up, the sense that the animal gets is different. And in fact, we can scientifically measure this by understanding that the emotional states that we go into also deeply impacts the pheromones and the hormones that we release, which then impacts the smell that's being picked up in the scent. This literally ends up making you attractive or making you disgusting. It makes you fearful, it makes you bad, and people can pick up the vibe, they can physically smell it. These are real physiological factors that occur as a result of inner psychological work. So when you go and you look at your ceremony and you look at your sigils, yes, these are useful contemplation points, and many of the ancient ones carry within them hidden teachings. If you sit and look at the sigil and you visualize it in 3D, you can unlock hidden messages inside of these practices. Take your runes, for example. Instead of just imagining the rune in front, go out in nature. Look at how the shadows fall from a tree onto the floor or different things and see those patterns. This allows you to align many would say with the hidden message in it, but what's really happening is you're aligning your conscious mind to unconscious processes. This alignment of the conscious self to the unconscious self opens you up, yes, to the spirit of the being, but more importantly to your own higher inner genius, the part of your brain that is controlling your reality. Remember, your conscious mind is aware of 2,000 bits of information per second. That's how much the neocortex roughly calculates. Yet your unconscious, your cerebellum, calculates over 400 billion bits of information per second. To put that in context for you, wherever the city or town you live in right now, if you take your home or your current position, you take that as the needle, of it, most of your city and most of the town that it's connected to, obviously depending on which one you're in, would roughly be that ocean of 400 billion bits. So your conscious awareness is usually limited to your simple survival needs, your mechanisms and stuff like that. Yet your unconscious mind is capable of calculating what's going on in the neighbor's yard, what's happening tomorrow. It has all these things. And that's why the ancients called it the God within. Stop giving your power away to other forces and spirits. Understand the mechanism by which this works. And I'm not saying that spirits can't help you. They are part of you and you are part of them. And it's a way of traversing the unconscious realm within ourselves to unlock more potentials of consciousness. But recognize that you are the key. You are the secret. You are the mystery and you are the God of your reality. And that's not a default setting. That is a potential within you that needs to be evolved to. And you're evolving into it the more you work on yourself, the more you grow personally, and the more you learn to trust and heal the relationship within you. I'm Adam Knox, and I hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and I'll see you in the next episode. And remember to live deliciously.
I've always felt a little different. A little uneasy between regular folk, a bit of a dreamer, a lost cause, a little non-ordinary, some would say. I think I've always just been this way. My mother said I was special, my father thought I should be feared. But I knew that witchcraft coursed through my veins the first time I tasted the lips of the goddess inside the rain. Yes, I'm a witch, it's true. And sure, we are the ones who believe in the beauty of nature, who believe in the things science, absent of art, cannot explain, who instead of religion would have romance. And sure, you may think we have lost our way, when in the world of predictable things we have such unfamiliar things that we would like to say. But maybe, in a world so cold and alone, a little unfamiliar is exactly what is needed to show us the way home.